think there's two categories of opposition here and people using the SPLC. The New York Times is probably doing it out of ideological sympathy and purpose. But the other big factor is laziness in the media. And I think the vast majority, probably including these charity organizations, aren't doing it out of a particular animus, but that it's so easy for them. And so therefore a tactic suggests itself. And I wanted all three of your comments on this tactic. Is there a way to take advantage of the laziness of reporters to provide lists, maybe a consortium of conservative groups, to provide lists of disreputable organizations, including CARE, and every time I hear NIAC mentioned on a radio station or a TV station or interview, I go ballistic for the same reason. It's the entire history of the organization. That's the Iranian-American group that has close ties to the regime in Iran. But it happens all the time. CARE is mentioned without giving its actual history that the General just mentioned. So is the Southern Poverty Law Center. There's a whole group of those. And so maybe we ought to, I want all of you to respond about what is it that we can do to take advantage of this fundamental laziness of so many in the media.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I just, and one of the great ironies here is that, a lot of the center's work has been documenting these groups and their behaviors, their ties to foreign groups, and frankly, some of the appalling hatred that comes out of them, anti-LGBT statements, anti-women, racist statements that come out of some of these groups. And for that very act of keeping track of these sorts of bad behavior from these groups is the reason why we are on the SPLC list and why we often take a great deal of flack from the media. And so there is definitely a double standard in terms of the very performance of the idea of keeping track of groups that engage in hateful behavior, where it's lauded when it's done by the SPLC. But if conservative groups raise questions about some of the other groups that are not on the SPLC lists, that's considered unacceptable. So I think you raise an interesting point that I would suggest has been preempted by the very fact that they don't consider this sort of political behavior of looking into groups and their hateful statements as acceptable when it comes from the right.
Well, I think the short answer is yes, but the more drawn out answer is a lot more difficult. We don't want to come out with our own hate group list that suggests about the SPLC what the SPLC suggests about us, because it's fundamentally deceptive. It's like
and fundamentally we're for free
across
speech.
this. Yeah, a lot of times there's this talking point that a lot of people that I very much admire say, and they come out and they say that the Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate group. And I'm like, I respond, no, it's not. Hate group means something. We have to hold the Southern Poverty Law Center to account that when they say somebody's a hate group, they're associating them with the Ku Klux Klan. They mean to do this over and over and over again. We have their public statements. We are not going to say that the Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate group in that same way. However, they are a group that really should not be trusted. They're a group that is spreading animus. They're a group that is, twisting the facts against their political opponents. And they're clearly engaging in deceptive tactics. So if we come out with a list of disreputable liberal organizations, and I think that's a great idea. I think we should have a coalition come together so that it can't be ignored. One of the difficult things is that it often is ignored, as the Center has shown time and time again, and as unfortunately we've seen recently with the statements against the Equality Act on Capitol Hill. You have this broad coalition of lesbian feminists joining with pro-lifers, joining with religious freedom people, all saying, look, the Equality Act is a bad deal, and they don't get any media coverage. So I think holding groups' feet to the fire and consistently coming out with a message is clear. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was because I think the Southern Poverty Law Center is the headwaters of this. But you're very right in saying that NIAC, in saying that CARE, these organizations are in a similar situation, that are given credibility that is not due them, and we should have some way of fighting back.